Hello again. My name is Jim Staley. We have been looking at evidences of God in 5 different areas. And welcome back today as we again look at evidence of God. This is the 5th and last part. It's in science. There will be 2 messages on these evidences that are found in science. In the last 4 lessons, we started looking at the evidence of God. There are 5 areas again: life, nature, history, prophecy, and science. We started with life and then nature, and there we went to history and prophecy. We have so much available to us in just any one of these to know there is a God. There is evidence that God is at work in our lives. We can see his work in nature. History contains evidence that not just Christians confirm the words written in the Bible. Prophecy makes it undeniable that the author of this book or authors of these books had extraordinary knowledge of future events. Today we'll look at evidences by looking at some areas where the Bible proved more accurate than science. Some very recent scientific discoveries proved the Bible correct over past scientific assumptions. One of the things that John Clayton often emphasizes is that God is an architect or engineer. Remember, John Clayton is a scientist who was converted to Christianity because he was an atheist at first, but when he looked into science, he became a believer because he found out that as much as the harder he tried to disprove God, the more God came up as being the correct answer. So some people see God as a magician. As John likes to say, they see God sapping things into existence. So which is correct? Architect, engineer, magician, or chance? Because again, now we have 3 choices. That chance being evolution, and magician, again, zapping things into existence. Or is God an intelligent architect and engineer, carefully planning things? Well, if we think of God as a magician, we are rejecting science. We are like the ancients who saw magic in lightning, volcanoes, wind, fire, and everything else. They saw magic in the created things and they worshiped the creation. So they had a god of the volcano, a god of the river, a god of the harvest, and on and on. Science today has told us what causes volcanoes and hurricanes, so we no longer see them as gods. Science tells us how stars begin and how they die. It tells us how the elements are formed within stars. Science also tells us how our solar system developed. Plate tectonics reveal the processes that gave us today's continents, and scientists are studying the formation of our atmosphere. We see how millions of things came together to provide us with a habitable planet. Were all of those merely fortunate accidents, or were they intelligently designed? Remember, the alternatives are architect, engineer, magician, or chance. Remember Genesis 1, and throughout the scriptures and other places it says God created. The greatest mystery of all is how non-living elements became life. How did those elements come together to form amino acids, proteins, RNA, DNA, and living cells? We are still far from understanding that, but it is evident that the chance of it happening without a guiding intelligence is very small. However, once that life threshold has been crossed, the accepted faith in the science community is that evolution took over from there. The accepted science dogma today is the worship of evolution. That dogma says naturalistic evolution is the God that developed all forms of life, including ourselves. For a scientist to deny that dogma is to commit heresy. Any scientist who wants to keep his or her job, credentials, prestige, or credibility must adhere to the dogma and worship the God of evolution. It has all happened by natural selection acting on random mutations, and you better believe it, or at least pretend you do. But is chance a variable explanation? Does our everyday existence of designed things, from shovels and lawnmowers to cars and computers, tell us anything? It should say to us that those things don't design themselves. It should be evident that intelligence, not mere chance, was involved in all of them. Again, the alternatives are architect, engineer, or chance. If we rule out chance, that leaves us with 2 options. If God is a magician who zapped everything into existence, made it look old, the study of science becomes futile. Why would God try to fool us into thinking we can study the ancient creation process when there is no such thing? If God is an architect engineer, we can study the creation and we can see how he worked to design and engineer the universe, our solar system, our planet, and even life. We don't see those creations as gods. Instead, we see the God who created them, and we worship him. The bottom line is that we see evidence of God in the things that he has made. You can see that in Romans 1:20. I would like to share a portion of the article by Roland Ernst, written last year. He started out with this statement. That was the year 2020. The Bible refers to a few scientific facts. While the truth of the Bible does not hinge on scientific statements, when it does speak to science, it is accurate. And here are a few examples of his. 1. The most curious statement in the Bible is found in Amos 5:8. The King James translates this passage as 7 stars and Orion. When the King James Bible was translated in 1601, science only knew of 6 stars in the Pleiades constellation. Consequently, the translators just wrote 7 stars. Now, you have to use the old King James Version to read this. It says, this here is Amos 5:8. Seek him that maketh the 7 stars and the Orion, and turneth the shadow of death into morning, and maketh the day dark with night, that calleth for the waters of the sea, and poureth them out upon the face of the earth. The Lord is his name. If you go to the New King James Version or other versions of the Bible nowadays, you read in Amos 5:8, it says, he made the Pleiades and Orion. He turned the shadow of death unto morning, and makes the day dark as night. He calls the waters of the sea and pours them out on the face of the earth. The Lord is his name. Today, modern astronomy knows that there are 7 stars. The 7th star is very dim and can only be seen with telescope. Modern translators can now put a name to the constellation, Pleiades. How did the Old Testament authors know that there were 7 stars in the Pleiades constellation? They would have needed a modern day telescope to see that, but yet they wrote 7 stars. And we now know it as constellation Pleiades up there by Orion. The next thing, example 2, the book of Job records 2 very interesting scientific statements. In Job 26:7, it reads, he stretches out the north over empty space. He hangs the earth on nothing. Ancient Hindu writings has the earth on the back of 4 elephants who were standing on the back of a giant turtle swimming in a sea of milk. The Japanese and many other religious traditions had the earth suspended on the back of a giant catfish. Greeks at one point taught that the earth was suspended on the back of Atlas. Both Job and the Greeks in the 6th century BC first brought forth the idea of a spherical earth. Job thought by most to be written about between the 4th and 7th century, and others put Job back as far as 2000 BC. Some think that the Hebrew Bible, because of a heaven above, earth, and then hell below, thought the world was flat in a round fashion. Of all the ancient religions, the Bible is unique in its description of the earth being hung on nothing. It would be centuries before gravity, centrifugal forces, and planetary orbits would be understood. Yet here in Job, one of the earliest books in the Bible, we have this very original and accurate description of the world. We can be grateful to Columbus, who saw the earth as round instead of flat, as was thought in his day, that as he sought support to sail west to get what he thought would be Japan on the Far East. He may have been motivated by imperial and economic incentives, but he also had a desire to advance the Christian faith. Now, Job chapter 38 is where God questions Job out of the whirlwind. There are many things God reveals in this time of questioning that covers a few chapters, but we will look at this one item, springs in the sea. If we go to Job chapter 38:16, we can read, Have you entered the springs of the sea, or have you walked in search of the depths? There in Job 42, we can see he had camels, sheep, oxen, and donkeys. He was not someone who seemed to spend his life on the water. He would seem to have little knowledge of springs in the sea. He would have only known of the springs on land. When we look closely at the flood in Genesis, we see a reference to these springs as well. We're reading Genesis 7, 11, and 12. There, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were open, and the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Two other places that refer to this storehouse of water are Psalms 33, 6 and 7, and Proverbs 8, 27 through 29. We'll read Psalms 33, 6 through 7. It says, "By the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and all the hosts of them by the breath of his mouth. He gathered the waters of the sea together as a heap. He lays up the deep in storehouses." Read Proverbs 8, 27 through 29, because again here, the Bible says, "When he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he established the clouds above, when he strengthened the fountains of the deep, when he assigned to the sea its limits, so that the waters would not transgress his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth." These will make more sense when we consider what science has learned about the world we live in. Let's check this out. There was an article a few years ago that brought this out. There are 4 main points in this matter that the Old Testament affirms. First, it asserts positively that springs do exist in the ocean. God claims to be the source of this knowledge and allows man to test this by scientific investigation of the ocean floor. Second, the undersea springs are said to be established at the earth's creation. Third, the flood of Noah is claimed to have been caused, at least in part, by an unusual activity of ocean floor springs. And fourth, springs are mentioned so we can marvel at the wisdom and power of God. Let's really take a look at this, because it says, let's look at the discoveries. The discovery of ocean floor springs was and is an important part of scientific exploration of our Earth. Before 1930, little was known about the ocean floor. Makes sense, you can't get down there. That's pretty deep. Volcanoes, when they broke the surface of the water, were the first evidence that there is undersea activity. The deep sea dives of William Beebe's Biosphere in the 1930s provided a close look at the ocean floor. At that time, no springs were observed. By the 1940s, mapping of the undersea topography was being done with echo sounders. Thousands of undersea volcanoes called seamounts and guyouts were recognized, and speculation about underwater springs increased. In the 1960s, metal-rich hot brines were discovered using sonar in the bottom of this Red Sea. This brine was an indirect evidence of water coming out of the ocean floor. Reports from Mexican abalone divers aided scientists in locating shallow water hot springs along the coast of Baja California with the use of scuba gear. Deep diving research submarines have been constructed to withstand 3 tons per square inch or 488 kilograms per square centimeter pressure at the ocean floor. The first direct observation of deep sea springs or their mineralized vents appear to have been made on the Mid-Atlantic Ridge by the famous Project Famous in 1973. Spectacular hot springs were then discovered on the Galapagos Ridge in the Pacific Ocean by the 23-foot or 7-meter-long submersible Alvin in 1977. That's not that long ago. Alvin also explored, photographed, and sampled hot springs on the East Pacific Rim just south of the Gulf of California in 1979. 1979. Thousands of years from when Job or Genesis, even Proverbs or Psalms were written. There was no way man could have gone that deep in the water to have known of these things back then. Scientists have discovered vast reserves of fresh water located deep beneath the ocean that could prevent a global water crisis. A recent study revealed that an estimated 500,000 cubic kilometers of low salinity water is buried beneath the seabed on continental shelves around the world. The water is located off the coast of Australia, North America, China, and South Africa, according to the publication Science Daily. Dr. Vincent Post of the National Center of Groundwater Research and Training in the School of the Environmental at Flinders University puts it like this. The volume of water resource is 100 times greater than the amount we've extracted from the Earth's subsurface in the past century since 1900. While scientists knew of fresh water under the seafloor, they thought it only occurred under rare or specific conditions. Fresh water is increasingly under stress and strain, so the discovery of significant new stores off the coast is very exciting. It means that more options can be considered to help reduce the impact of droughts and continental water shortages. These aquifers are similar to the ones below land, which much of the world relies on for drinking water. Drill a well, get water. You tap into the water aquifers underneath the ground. And their salinity is low enough for them to be turned into potable water. The only problem is that once they are used up, there is no way to replenish them. Groundwater, well water, usually rains, soaks through the ground, and you end up replenishing that. These here, very deep, too deep to be replaced. If the entire current Earth's atmosphere released its water, it would only cover the globe to a depth of about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters above sea level. If all the present ion ice on the Earth melted, including glaciers, ice caps, and ice sheets, it would raise the sea level approximately 230 feet or 70.1 meters. If all the water within the Earth's crust was pumped into the surface of the Earth, it would raise the sea level about another 600 feet or 182.9 meters, which is much more significant. But when we consider that many of Earth's mountains tower over the Earth above 25,000 feet, which is 7,620 meters in height, such numbers don't even come close. Where is the water from the flood? The answer, apparently the same place it came from, primarily the oceans. Read Psalms 104, 6 through 9. When we go there, it reads, "You covered it with the deep as with a government. The waters stood above the mountains. At your rebuke they fled. At the voice of your thunder they hastened away. They went up over the mountains. They went down into the valleys, to the place where you founded them. You have set a boundary that they may not pass over, that they may not return to cover the earth." This is talking about what happened during the flood and after the flood. While Scripture does not give many details about what occurred during the flood, it does provide a few very important clues. When the flood began, the fountains of the great deep, that's the ocean, were broken up, all of them. That's in Genesis 7:11 and Proverbs 3:20. Such terminology suggests that the breakup of the ocean floor and the release of the water and magma from below the Earth's surface onto the ocean floor, using our knowledge of geology in the 21st century, such terminology suggests plate tectonics, the breakup and initiation of the movement of the plates that comprise the surface of the Earth may have been activated at that point. The breakup of the great deep is mentioned, followed by the opening of the windows of heaven, intense rain for 40 days and nights. That's Genesis 7:11. The waters increased, Genesis 7:17, and greatly increased, Genesis 7:18, prevailing for 150 days, Genesis 7:24. That's roughly 5 months. After that point, the fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were also stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. A great wind passed over the earth, and therefore the waters began to recede continually. That's in Genesis 8, 1 through 3, until the ark came to rest several weeks later, Genesis 8:4. Psalms 104 speaks of creation and the flood. Verses 6 through 9 refers to the flood and tells us Mountains rose and the valleys sank down during the event. While some higher elevation locations apparently existed prior to the flood, Genesis 7:19 and 20, taller mountains formed during the flood. Psalms 104:9 indicates the geographical activity that ensued the flood created a geographical setting that now disallows a global flood to occur again. There in Psalms 104:9 we can read, "You have set a boundary that they may not pass over, that they may not return to cover the earth." Why would he say they would not return if they hadn't already been there? Yes, they didn't have been there. Is there physical evidence to support and further explain these statements? Undeniably. A way that the flood managed to cover the earth so much that it ended up leaving the ark on top of the mountain. To review, we've looked at the stars, the earth, and springs of the sea. All these things were correctly written against common ideas of their times. Men who took God for his word made great discoveries that benefit man. What other religion can claim to have benefited society in both spiritual and physical world as has the Bible? We have looked at life, nature, history, and prophecy, and we did not cover it all. We just scratched the surface. In your journey with Christ, I pray you can build on these examples and develop your own library of evidences that you can share with those who question if God is real and if God is the God of the Bible. There is one last lesson that will deal with the evidences in science. I'd like to share with you the last one that really applies to what is happening today. It deals with what the Bible has and has to say about health and the medical field. I hope you'll join me then. I pray that God will bless you and guard you in your service. Again, thank you for listening, tuning in, and I hope to see you next time when we look at more evidences of God in science. Thank you.